Welcome back to Wrong Sports as I continue my international journey as I bring to you college football first, the first games that happened outside of America. In my first episode of this series, I went over the first games that happened in Cuba, I went over the first games that happened in Japan, and in the previous episode, I went over the first games that happened in Europe. But for this next video in the series, I'm going to be going over the international game that didn't happen. A game that was supposed to be kicking off the 1989 season, and it would have been the first American football game that would have been happening in the now open Soviet Union. But before I get to that, make sure as always you subscribe to the channel below. Also, of course, make sure you ring the bell so you can get updates on brand new videos that I will be dropping in the new year. And of course, as always, make sure you share this video and share this channel with other college football fans so I can get more subscribers. Trying to get over the 1,000 mark before the end of the year, so help me out with that. Plus, as always, you can check out my social media. You can help out the channel on my Patreon, and you can check out my podcast in the description below. But this video is going to be about the international game that didn't happen. It was supposed to be called the Glasnost Bowl, and this game was going to be kicking off the 1989 season, and it would be a game that was supposed to bring American culture and American football to the now open Soviet Union. But first, the talk of this game began in 1985, after the US's boycott of the 1980 Olympics that took place in Moscow, and then the Soviet Union's reciprocal response of boycotting the 1984 LA Olympics. Due to this and the Soviet Union's new order of openness, or Glasnost, the Soviet Ministry of Sports and Physical Culture came to an agreement with Raycom, a former media conglomerate, to bring college football to the Soviet Union. If you don't know what Raycom is, just look it up. It was another media channel, basically like a Fox Sports Net, something that had a bunch of syndicates all over the country that would broadcast college football. They were one of the first ones to actually broadcast college football and college basketball all around the country. The game was first announced on October 18th, 1988, and it would be a college football game to kick off the 1989 season. So after the announcement of the game was out there was a lot that needed to be done. First thing was that Raycom had to tell the Division I NCAA that this game would be happening and would be televised as a huge start to the 1989 season. That was a good thing to tell schools that it was going to be nationally televised because they were trying to get the best teams to come to this game. And a lot of teams were pretty interested in the game, like the University of Florida, University of Miami, Florida State, Penn State, Alabama, Texas, and UCLA were all interested in this game, really big blue bloods at the time. But even though the teams were interested, it wasn't going to be that easy to agree to this game, as of course the NCAA would step in, because they didn't grant the game an exception to its then rule where they permitted teams to only play 11 regular season games. And since this game was supposed to happen within the next year, it wouldn't leave teams too much time to rearrange their next year's schedule for a game in Russia. Once that hurdle was put out there, a lot of teams like Penn State and Wisconsin would back out due to not wanting to lose a home game and extra income to play in Russia. Other teams like Miami and Florida didn't want to play a bowl-like game in another country to start their season, and also played on the other side of the world as they thought it would kind of ruin the rest of their season. So to help encourage teams to fill this game, Raycom would offer $300,000 to participating schools, plus Raycom would plan travel packages for 3,500 fans of both schools so they could go and cheer on each school. But even though the money was big, only 2 schools would remain after all this, as USC and Illinois would still be in the running for this game and actually were interested and excited to be a part of it. Illinois would make a deal with Raycom where Raycom would buy out a home game from Illinois' 1989 schedule, while USC got approval after Kansas was willing to release USC from its commitment, and the game was announced in late November 1988 that USC would face Illinois to start the 1989 season in Russia. So with that big hurdle now jumped, there would have to be the biggest hurdle, which was the endless amounts of logistical concerns to get this game going. First off, the Soviet Union had never seen American football played, so when this game was initially being talked about, Soviet officials were questioning the rules of the game, and if someone were to die on the field. Yes, they thought someone was seriously going to die during this game because they didn't really even have rugby either, so they really had no idea what this sport was. To go along with that, there was no American football stadium in the country, and even the largest one at the time, Dynamo Stadium, didn't have a big enough field for the game, as it was 10 yards shorter than a regulated American football field. The stadium also didn't have large enough locker rooms to accommodate 80 players per team. They also had a grass field instead of AstroTurf and didn't have a communication system from the upstairs booth to the field, where coordinators would often sit and communicate with the coaches on the field. Finally, this game was to take place at the tail end of the Cold War, so if there was a flare-up between America and the Soviet Union, the game obviously wouldn't happen, and also they had to worry about if the teams were in the Soviet Union already and something bad were to happen, what would happen to these players? But even with all that known, both teams and their coaches wanted to get an idea of how things would go. So Illinois head coach John Mackovic and USC head coach Larry Smith and their staffs would visit Moscow in the spring of 1989 to plan around the facilities and the accommodations there. When the coaches and the administrators got there, they saw that a lot needed to be done to get this game going. First off, they needed to get AstroTurf for the field, since the field was grass and would get destroyed after the American football game. In addition, the colleges realized they also needed goalposts, food for the players, ice and medical equipment for injuries, and yes, even footballs. They didn't think of that either. So basically, they needed to airlift an entire American college stadium to Russia for this game. But even with all of these restrictions, the colleges and Raycom accepted it and worked together to try to get this game done and have it look and feel as American as possible. As the weeks went on, more stories and things would come out to keep this game special in the headlines. Some weird stories would also come out of it too, like the advertising, which tried to tie in the colors of the USC Trojans, which was red, to the Soviet red, and the fact that the legendary Illinois player was Red Grange. Get it? It's all red. I guess that was one way to advertise it. But that was only a small weird thing to come out, as USC is known for their mascot of the Trojan riding in on a white horse. But since USC couldn't transport a horse halfway around the world, they agreed to have a Russian white horse ride in with the Trojan mascot on top. That was how far they were going to go to get this game going. But once again, the Soviets and Raycom didn't let any of this stop them, as they tried to push through and get this game to kick off at the start of September. The plan had the teams flying by charter jets from Los Angeles and Chicago to Moscow on August 28th, then having 2 days of practice before the game, a little bit of sightseeing after the game, and then returning to America on September 4th. And apparently there were stories out there of USC and Illinois having fans that bought packages, which were worth upwards of $2,500 and included airfare, hotel, and tickets to the game. But even with all those problems and the crazy solutions that Raycom had to think of to get this game to kick off the 1989 season, all that would be for naught, as on June 8, 1989, the LA Herald-Examiner broke the news that the game was canceled. The reason that was given was by Raycom, who said contractual concerns made them cancel this game. That was mostly referencing hotel and transportation issues for the fans and the teams in the Soviet Union, as there weren't a lot of hotels for the teams to stay in or fans to stay in, and really Raycom didn't have anything to do with the scheduling of the hotels apparently. They thought that the Soviets would take care of it, and the Soviets thought that they were going to take care of it, so there was just a lot of confusion. Along with that, there were other concerns by the college teams and officials that all of the things they needed for this game to kick off wasn't going to happen. And instead of traveling all the way to Russia for no game, they instead canceled the game. The hotel issue was probably the biggest reason I can find for this game not happening, but also Raycom got pretty skeptical that this game would work by the late summer after all those issues. Also, when Raycom and the college officials went to Moscow to check the field and talk more with the Soviets in the late summer, they were not a fan of their hotel rooms, which apparently had cockroaches, and moving to another room was hard since there weren't many in the country at this point. In addition, Soviet officials also asked for a delay in negotiating for the game, which wouldn't work due to the time frame that they had left to get this game to kick off. Raycom would pay back the money that anyone had paid for the travel packages, which was no more than $3,000 or so, but it was still a pretty big financial hit since, like I mentioned before, those travel packages were worth $2,500. After the game was canceled, it would come out that Raycom was negotiating with 6 different sets of Soviet officials at that point, which caused negotiations to run for over 9 months and also obviously cause a lot of confusion as to what was needed and how it would all happen. This may also be the reason that so many weird stories came out of this game too, like them having to pretty much transport an entire American football field to the country, also having to change mascots, hotel rooms, all this crazy stuff. But since the first American college football game wouldn't happen in Russia, USC and Illinois would still happen, as they would have the backup plan kickoff, which was to hold the game in LA to kick off the season, and it resulted into a fantastic game in which Illinois won 14-13. But even though the first American college football game wouldn't happen in Moscow, the first American football game would happen, as 90 high school football players, yes, high school football players from small towns just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, would raise the money to send themselves to Russia for an exhibition tour of games. So actually, the first American football game was played in Russia by high schoolers from Oklahoma. So there's a fun trivia fact for you. The games took place in the summer of 1989, and the games helped to bring American football to the country and helped to establish a league in the Soviet Union as well that would play for the next decade or so. The Glasnost Bowl game was pretty ambitious for the time, and if they had another year, or maybe if they waited until the mid-1990s, this game might have happened, as the Berlin Wall would fall only months after the USC-Illinois game in LA. Plus, it may have been easier to negotiate with the Soviets if they waited until the 1990s, since the breakup of the Soviet Union was still happening during the 1980s, which caused all that confusion and had Raycom pretty much negotiate with any Soviet official that they could find. But I haven't been able to find any more facts about any other American football games happening in Russia, and I'm pretty sure there's not going to be any more that will be happening in the future, at least for the next 5 years or so, so I don't think this will ever happen again. But thank you so much for going on this international journey with me, episode 4 of College Football First's International Journey, as I take you to the game that was supposed to happen in the Soviet Union. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. As always, make sure you like the video below. Also, share this video with other college football fans. And I have to remind you one more time before I go to subscribe to the channel below, ring the bell so you can get updates on brand new videos that will be coming out in the new year. And check out my Patreon where you can help out the channel. You can check out my podcast and my social media in the description below. Have a fantastic rest of your day.